My name is Nora Callahan. I am 34 years old. The night my appendix ruptured, I lay on a gurney in the Mercy General Emergency Room for 6 hours and 19 minutes with a temperature of 104 degrees, a heart rate of 122, and an IV drip that had run dry twice before anyone noticed. The charge nurse, a woman named Denise Grable, told me afterward that I had been 40 minutes from septic shock when they finally wheeled me into surgery. 40 minutes. The kind of number that permanently rearranges your understanding of how close the edge actually is, and what it means that no one came. My mother called the emergency room that night at 11:17. I know the exact time because Denise wrote it in the incident log, and I have a certified copy of that log in a folder in my desk at home, where it has sat for 5 years. My mother did not ask for the attending physician. She did not ask to speak to me. She did not ask what emergency surgery involved, or how long it would take, or whether there was someone who should be there when I woke up. What she said to Denise was this: "Is she stable enough that we don't need to come in? We're already packed for the weekend and Stephanie's spa reservation is non-refundable." Denise told her I was being prepped for emergency surgery. My mother said, "Okay, well, tell her we'll check in when we get back Monday." Then she hung up. I did not find out until I woke from surgery at 2:14 in the morning, tubes still inside, an oxygen monitor clipped to my finger, to a room with no flowers, no coat across the visitor's chair, no familiar face anywhere in that pale corridor. A different nurse, one whose name I never learned, told me my family had called and sent their love. Sent their love. Like a text message. Like something you do when you cannot be bothered to find a card. I lay in that room and I looked at the ceiling. I counted the tiles. There were 46. I counted them 3 times to be sure, and somewhere in that counting, something inside me that had been slowly softening for years became very, very still. Not hard. Still. The way a body of water goes still just before everything underneath it shifts. I did not cry. I did not call them back. I just lay there and let the machines count the seconds for me. And I made no decisions at all. I only noted, with the quiet precision of someone who has spent years working with numbers and facts, that this was what it looked like, that this was the shape of the thing I had been living inside of, without ever naming it directly, and that it had a name now, and I knew what it was. Before I go any further, I want to stop and ask you something. If you are watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is where you are sitting, I want to know, what city, what country, what hour of the day or night? Drop it in the comments below, because I read every single one of them, and I love knowing where this reaches. And if any part of what you just heard already sounds familiar, if you have ever been the steady one, the capable one, the one everyone counts on until the moment you actually need them, please subscribe, because this channel was built for you. These stories are told for you, and this one is only getting started. This is that story. Now let me take you back to the beginning. To a family called the Callahans, to a white colonial on Lakeview Road in Lakewood, Ohio, with a wraparound porch and a gas fire that my father lit every October and let burn through March like a quiet argument about permanence. And to the years before I understood what I was actually living inside of. My father is Richard Callahan. He is 62 years old and has spent the last 23 years as a regional branch manager for a mid-size insurance company called Hargrove Mutual, based out of Columbus. Richard is the kind of man who arrives 7 minutes early to every appointment and considers that to be only barely adequate. He shakes hands with both hands. He knows the names of everyone's children at the company holiday party. He speaks about financial responsibility the way certain men of a particular generation speak about it, as though the topic is moral rather than practical, as though discipline in a budget is a character trait rather than a circumstance. He has a plaque on his office wall that reads, "The measure of a man is what he does with power," which he bought himself at a craft fair in 2008, and has never appeared to find ironic. My mother is Carol Callahan, 59 years old, a former kindergarten teacher who left the classroom when my sister Stephanie was born and never went back. Carol volunteers at the parish library on Wednesday mornings. She makes an exceptional lemon pound cake that she brings to every occasion, welcome or otherwise. She has what I can only describe as a specific and well-practiced talent for reframing any situation at all, so that her preferred version of events sounds like the morally obvious one. She does not lie exactly. She interprets. She selects. She presents the frame that contains the picture she wants you to see, and she does it so naturally, with such genuine warmth, that you do not notice until much later that the frame was never the whole wall. Then, there is Stephanie. Stephanie is 31 years old and has been the gravitational center of our family for as long as either of us can remember. She is 3 years younger than me and, in the estimation of my parents, approximately 30 years further ahead in the things that matter. Stephanie is blonde and laughs easily, and married a man named Joel Pruitt at 26 in a wedding that cost my parents $42,000. I know the precise amount because I was standing in the kitchen the afternoon my father called the caterer to dispute a linen charge, and I heard him recite the total number twice as a reference point for his grievance. He did not sound upset about the $42,000. He sounded like a man who considered the investment reasonable. Stephanie and Joel live in a 4-bedroom colonial in Westlake with 2 golden retrievers and a kitchen renovation that my parents funded to the tune of $14,000 and still reference at family dinners with a proprietorial satisfaction as though the quartz countertops carry the family name. Stephanie has not held a job for longer than 18 months at any point in her adult life. I state this not as a moral critique, but as a factual observation, because my parents have never once acknowledged it as fact. She tried event coordination and found it stressful. She attempted a real estate license and abandoned it before the exam. She opened an online boutique called Thistle and Thread that sold curated home goods and quietly closed after 8 months, with, as far as I can tell, no accounting of where the startup funds came from or where they went. Each of these pivots was met by my parents with the same generous patience they might extend to a child who is learning something new and difficult and who deserves every possible encouragement. When Thistle and Thread closed, my mother said, "She's just finding her path." When I passed the CPA exam and received my licensure at 26, my father looked up from his newspaper and said, "Good. Stability is important." Then he went back to the crossword. I want to give you 2 specific examples, because vague patterns are easy to dismiss and I have no interest in being dismissed. The first is Thanksgiving of the year I turned 28. I had been promoted to senior accountant at Weston Financial Group, a firm in Cleveland that manages private client portfolios with a minimum investable asset threshold of $2 million. It was the most significant professional milestone of my life to that point. I had worked for it in the particular way that you work for things when you have no safety net. Methodically, without weekends, without the luxury of a stumble, being forgiven by someone else's checkbook. I brought the promotion letter to Thanksgiving dinner. I set it on the kitchen counter before anyone sat down. My father picked it up, read the single paragraph, nodded twice, and set it back beside the peppermill. "Good," he said. "Steady income is everything." Then he turned to Stephanie and asked whether she and Joel had looked at that vacation rental property in Sanibel yet, because the rental market down there was apparently something worth watching. I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket. I ate turkey. I drove home in the dark. I told myself it was fine, and I very nearly believed it. The second example is my 30th birthday. My parents called it 7 in the evening, which is not in itself the problem. The problem is that my mother spent the first 4 minutes describing, in warm and specific detail, the surprise dinner they had thrown for Stephanie's 30th 3 years earlier. 15 guests. A reservation at Pier W with a lake view. A cake from the French bakery on Detroit Avenue that Carol called, honestly, a masterpiece. Then she said, "We figured we'd keep yours low-key since you're not really the big party type." They took me to Applebee's. My father paid with a gift card he had received from the insurance company's client appreciation program. Stephanie sent a text. "Happy birthday, sis! Wish I could be there. Joel and I are in Cabo!" 3 exclamation points and a sun emoji. She did not call. I want to be precise about something. I am not telling you these things in order to accumulate your sympathy. I am telling you because you need to understand the pattern before you understand what the pattern eventually produced. Families develop ecosystems, and ecosystems have a logic to them, even when that logic is unkind. In the Callahan ecosystem, Stephanie was the one who was loved visibly, publicly, with enthusiasm and money and table placement and $30,000 weddings. I was the one who was loved in the way that people love things they rely on. A good car, a reliable appliance, the structural beam you never think about until there is a crack in the wall. Not unloved, relied upon. And the difference between those two things is the whole story. The night my appendix ruptured, I had been at work until 8:15 finishing a quarterly audit for one of Weston's largest accounts, a private equity group out of Pittsburgh with holdings that required particular care at quarter end. I drove myself home and noticed, somewhere on the shoreway, that what I had been interpreting as lower back tension from sitting too long had turned into something with a different quality entirely. Sharper, more directional, the kind of pain that does not respond when you shift your position. I pulled over in a Shell station parking lot on Clifton Boulevard and sat very still with my hands on the steering wheel for 4 minutes. Then I called a rideshare because I was not certain I could drive safely. I walked into the Mercy General emergency room at 7:48 in the evening. Denise Grable checked me in at the intake desk. She asked all the relevant questions in the efficient, unhurried way of someone who has asked them 10,000 times and still means them. She took my temperature, my blood pressure, my pain scale response. She asked whether there was someone I wanted notified. I gave her my parents' number. I gave her Stephanie's number. Then I lay down on a gurney behind a blue curtain and began the long work of waiting. The waiting room at Mercy General on a Monday night has a particular quality of time. It does not move the way time moves in ordinary places. It pools. I lay behind the curtain and listened to the sounds of a busy emergency floor. Voices, monitors, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, and I breathed shallowly because deeper breaths had begun to produce a feedback that I can only describe as the body's version of a warning light. Sometime after 10 o'clock, I became too sick to hold my phone. I set it face down on the mattress beside me and thought, distantly, that I should call someone, but the thought required a kind of effort that had become unavailable to me. Dr. Marcus Webb found me at 11:05. He was a compact man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and a manner that was both warm and completely without ambiguity. He ordered imaging before I finished describing the pain. When he came back, he said, "Your appendix has ruptured. There's early peritonitis. We need to go now." He said now in the way that word is meant, not as emphasis but as instruction. I signed the consent forms. An orderly appeared and the ceiling began to move above me. Fluorescent lights sliding past in sequence, and I remember thinking in the last coherent moment before the anesthesia that I had given Denise my parents' numbers, and I wondered if they were coming. I woke at 2:14 in the morning. Denise was at the foot of the bed. She looked up and said, "Good, you're back." I asked her if anyone had come. She paused the way that experienced nurses pause when they are deciding how much truth serves the patient. Then she said, "Your family called. They send their love and they'll be in touch on Monday." I turned my face toward the window. It was raining. The parking lot lights made pale halos in the wet glass, and the lot was empty and the night was entirely quiet. "They called before the surgery?" I asked. "Yes." "And they knew it was emergency surgery?" "I told your mother directly. I used those words." I did not say anything else. I closed my eyes. I counted the ceiling tiles. I counted them 3 times. They returned from the spa on Monday evening. My mother called me at 6:17. Her voice was rested and warm, the voice of someone who has spent a weekend being competently taken care of by professionals. She asked how I was feeling and spent approximately 40 seconds on that subject before transitioning to a detailed account of the spa weekend. The Hot Stones massage menu, a seaweed wrap she described as genuinely transformative. How Stephanie had needed the break so badly because of Joel's promotion and the question of whether to put in a pool. Then she asked if I had enough food in the apartment. I said I did. She said, "Good. You're always so capable." She said it the way a person says something true about someone they care for without noticing that the truth they are offering is the thing that hurts. After I hung up, I sat on the couch with the surgical discharge papers in my lap. I read them twice. Then I looked around my apartment, which was exactly as I had left it Monday morning. No one had been here. No one had left a note. The apartment looked like a place where a person lived alone, because that is what it was, and it would continue to be what it was for the 6 weeks of recovery I was about to do without assistance. I thought about what Denise had said when she wheeled me out on Sunday afternoon. She had bent slightly at the waist to bring herself to my eye level, and she had said very quietly, "I've done this for 19 years. The people who leave with no one waiting are almost always the people who never needed anyone before. That's not a coincidence." She straightened up, patted my hand once, and told the driver my address. I sat on my couch on Monday night, and I thought about that. About the Thanksgiving letter on the counter, about the Applebee's birthday, about the $42,000 and the $14,000, and the way capable sounds when it is the only word anyone has ever used for you, and something that had been forming slowly and without announcement, somewhere beneath the level of my daily awareness, clicked into place with the clean precision of a mechanism completing its intended function. Not anger, not grief, though grief would come later in small, manageable amounts at inconvenient times. Something quieter than both of those. Something that felt, oddly, like relief. The relief of finally being done pretending that the shape of a thing is not the shape it is. I opened my laptop. I opened a new spreadsheet, and I began to build a record. Not a record of feelings. A record of facts. Dates, times, dollar amounts, exact words, exact outcomes. The kind of record an accountant keeps, because an accountant understands that the truth lives in the data, and that data does not care what story you prefer. I documented the ER night first. The timeline, Denise's words, the incident log I had already requested in writing. Then I went back further. The promotion letter, the birthday dinner, the calls I had made, and the calls that had not come. The $2,000 I had sent Stephanie when Thistle and Thread was struggling, which she had thanked me for in a voice note and never mentioned again. I documented all of it. It took 4 evenings, which I had because I was recovering and could not lift anything or drive anywhere and had no visitors. By the end, I had a spreadsheet that ran to 4 tabs and 2 years of data that I had not consciously been collecting, but apparently had been storing, nonetheless, the way bodies store things they have not yet processed. Now I need to tell you about the other thing I had been building in the background of my life over those same years. Because it is the part of this story that no one in my family saw coming. And it is the reason that when the moment eventually came, I was not standing there with nothing. My job at Weston Financial Group had, by the year of the surgery, given me a particular set of skills applied over 8 years to a particular set of problems. Untangling complicated financial situations, finding the structure underneath apparent disorder, making numbers tell an honest story in language that decision-makers can use. I was good at this. I had always been good at it. And approximately 2 years before my appendix ruptured, a colleague named Thomas Brecker mentioned that his sister-in-law, a woman named Diane Yoon, who ran a medical billing company in Columbus, needed someone to organize 3 years of disorganized books in preparation for an acquisition she was pursuing. I took it on over a series of weekends. I charged a consulting rate. I delivered clean, acquisition-ready financials in 6 weeks. The acquiring company's CFO called me directly afterward and asked whether I was available for additional engagements. I said I was, and that was how Callahan Advisory Partners LLC began. Filed with the Ohio Secretary of State on a Tuesday afternoon while my lunch sat getting cold on my desk, a small legal entity with a registered agent and a business checking account, and, at that point, 1 client and 6 weeks of billing. By the night I rode a cab to Mercy General, I had 11 private clients. By the time I was doing ankle circles on my living room floor with a printout from the physical therapy department, I had a revenue run rate quietly approaching my Weston salary. I had told no one in my family, not because I was hiding it, or not only because of that, but because I had long since stopped expecting that anything I built would be met with the kind of response that made sharing it feel worthwhile. I had learned from the Thanksgiving letter and the Applebee's birthday, and every good steady income is important, to keep my real life in a room with the door closed. I built it in silence, for years, in the margins of a career that my family called an office job. Tuesday nights when I could have been watching television. Saturday mornings when I could have been sleeping past 7. The slow accumulation of client by client, invoice by invoice, business account balance by business account balance. The way you build anything that is genuinely yours, without fanfare, without anyone watching, without anyone to tell when it goes right or comfort you when it goes wrong. That is what it costs to build something that belongs entirely to you. The price is the audience. I paid it gladly, and I want to tell you that the silence was not always comfortable. There are moments when you want someone to know what you are doing, when you want to say, "Look at this, I made this. Does it mean anything to you?" I had those moments. I simply learned, over time, to put them somewhere they would not cost me. And in doing so, I learned something that I suspect took my sister $42,000 not to learn. That the things you build without an audience are the only things that are completely, permanently, irreversibly yours. The months after the surgery settled into a rhythm. I went back to work at Weston 6 weeks after discharge. I expanded the private practice slowly and carefully, adding 1 client every 6 weeks, billing conservatively, building operating reserves before I ever spent $1 of the business income on anything personal. I found a financial planner named Eleanor Marsh through a colleague's referral, a woman in her 50s with a calm, precise voice and a direct manner, who asked questions no one in my family had ever thought to ask. What are you building toward? And what would it take to make sure it is still yours in 10 years, regardless of what happens? I had never been asked either of those questions before. I thought about them carefully before I answered. I began working with Eleanor to restructure my personal finances with the specific goal of becoming completely untethered from any scenario in which I might need my family's resources or in which they might need mine on terms I had not set. Eleanor asked me once, with the straightforward economy of someone who respects her clients enough not to tiptoe, whether I was planning to cut contact. I told her I was planning to be prepared for whatever I decided. She nodded. "That's the smartest kind of preparation," she said. Then she went back to the spreadsheet. My parents called on the usual schedule: Sunday afternoons, Christmas, birthdays observed briefly and without ceremony on their end. My father asked once, about a year after the surgery, how I was doing health-wise. I said I was fine. He said, "Good. The important thing is you're back on your feet." He did not say the word surgery. He did not say emergency room. He said health-wise and back on your feet. And I understood that he was looking for the information that would allow him to close a file. I gave it to him. I was good at that too. By the 18-month mark, I had purchased a condominium on the east side of Cleveland through a self-directed LLC and was renting it for income. I had a 6-month emergency fund. I had a clean legal separation between my personal assets and the business. I had also, quietly, changed my emergency contact at every institution that held one. My emergency contact was now Ruth Page. She had a spare key to my apartment and standing instructions about my medical preferences. She knew the name of my surgeon and the location of my advance directive. She was, in every practical sense, the family I had built to replace the one that had hung up the phone before my surgery and called it sufficient. This is the moment in the story where, if you are still watching, I want to speak to you directly. I know some of you are sitting with something right now that looks different in the details but feels identical in the center. You know what it is to pour yourself into a family that pours nothing back. You know what it is to be the capable one, the stable one, and to feel underneath all that functionality something very quiet that keeps asking, "Does anyone actually see me?" Drop it in the comments. Tell me where you are and what this is bringing up. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it now. Because what happens next is the part of this story I have been waiting to tell. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 5 years after the night in the emergency room. I was at my desk at 7:53 when my mother's name appeared on my phone. She did not call on Tuesdays. A Tuesday call meant something had changed. I picked up. Nora. Her voice was compressed and raw, the voice of someone who had been crying recently and was trying, with imperfect success, to not sound like it. "I need you to listen." I said I was listening. There was a pause, then, It's your father. It's his kidneys. Both of them. The doctors are calling it end-stage renal failure. He's going to need dialysis. And eventually, they said he's going to need a transplant. I let the words arrive and settle before I responded. How long have they known? I asked. My mother hesitated. They suspected in July. The confirmed diagnosis was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. She had sat on this for 3 weeks before calling me. I noted that in the part of my mind where I had been keeping records for 5 years, and I said nothing about it. I'm sorry to hear this, I said, and I meant it precisely. Whatever history lived between Richard Callahan and me, I was not glad he was sick. What does the transplant team say about the timeline? My mother's voice adjusted slightly, the way it does when she senses competence in a direction that could be useful. They said family members are the most likely compatible donors. Stephanie was tested. She's not a match. A pause that had a specific weight to it. They said you would need to be tested. We were hoping you would come home. I looked out my window. The lake was flat and entirely gray. I'll need some time to think about this, I said. My mother's voice sharpened almost imperceptibly. Nora, he could die without. Mom, I heard you. I said I need time to think. She said, of course, take a few days. I said goodbye. I set the phone down. I sat at my desk for 11 minutes. I looked at the lake. Then I called Gregory Tate, my attorney. Gregory confirmed that living kidney donation is a voluntary medical procedure under every applicable legal framework. No one can be compelled, under any circumstances, to donate an organ. My financial structure was clean and protected. Then he said, document everything going forward. Dates, conversations, requests, all of it. I told him I had been documenting for 5 years. He said, then you're ahead of it. I called Eleanor. I called Ruth. I drove to Ruth's house and we sat at her kitchen table until nearly midnight, not talking about what obligation required, talking about what I actually wanted. When I removed 34 years of being the capable one from the equation and just looked at the question plainly. By the time I drove home, I knew 2 things. The first was that I would get tested, not for them, but because not knowing would mean carrying someone else's uncertainty inside my body. And I was done carrying things that did not belong to me. The second was that whatever happened next would happen honestly. No more pretending the shape of things was not the shape it was. I made an appointment at the Cleveland Clinic Transplant Center for the following week. I told no one in my family I was going. The evaluation required 2 appointments and took 3 weeks. On a Thursday afternoon, my transplant coordinator called. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. She said the results were in, and she would like to discuss them at my earliest convenience. I was a match. I sat with that information for 72 hours. I went for 3 long walks along the lake, the kind of walks where you do not listen to anything. You do not let yourself argue yourself into or out of anything. You simply walk until the noise settles, and the actual question becomes visible underneath it. I spoke with Andrea Chu, the transplant social worker, who asked me carefully whether there was any family pressure involved in my decision. I told her there was a complex family history I wanted to be transparent about. She asked whether I felt free to make this decision without coercion. I told her yes. I meant it. I had walked far enough by then to know the difference between choosing freely and choosing from the old, exhausted need to be chosen back. I called my parents on a Sunday evening. Both were on the line before I had finished my opening sentence, which told me they had been sitting by the phone. I told them I had been evaluated at the Cleveland Clinic. I told them I was a match. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before, not quite crying. Something prior to it, like the moment before a very long exhale. My father said my name, just my name, nothing else. I let the silence hold. Then I said, before anything else happens, I need to say some things that have needed to be said for a long time. My mother said, of course, anything. My father said, we're listening. And so I told them. I told them about the night in the emergency room. I told them that I knew my mother had spoken with Denise before the surgery, that she had been told it was an emergency, that she had hung up and packed for the weekend anyway. I told them about waking up at 2 a.m. to an empty room and a nurse who said my family had sent their love. I told them about the 6 weeks of recovery I had done alone, with printouts from the physical therapy department and grocery deliveries, and no one who came by. I told them about the Thanksgiving letter on the counter, about the Applebee's birthday, about every Sunday call where Stephanie's news came first and mine was noted and filed, about 34 years of being told I was capable in a tone that meant I did not need tending, about the difference between being loved and being relied upon, and how I had spent my entire adult life confused about which one I was getting, and how I was no longer confused. I spoke for a long time. I did not raise my voice. My father did not interrupt me once. My mother said, "Nora, twice, and stopped herself both times. When I finished, the line was so quiet I could hear my father breathing. Then he said, in a voice I had not heard from him since I was very small, "I didn't know you were that sick." Your mother said stable. I told myself stable meant not critical. I said, Denise told her it was emergency surgery. She used those exact words. A very long silence. My mother said, "I thought you would be all right. You are always all right." I said, "I was 40 minutes from septic shock, Mom." She did not answer. Then my father said slowly, like a man choosing each word carefully, because he understands this time that he does not get to take them back. "I hear you. I am sorry that I was not there." I said, "I'm telling you this not to punish you. I'm telling you because nothing real can happen between us if we keep going with the version of things that makes everyone comfortable. I need you to understand what the last 5 years have actually been, before I will talk about anything else." My father said, "I understand." My mother said, "I'm so sorry, Nora." And I sat with that apology for a moment, waiting to feel whether it was real or performed. It was quiet and insufficient and real, which is the only way true apologies ever come. 2 days later, my parents drove to Cleveland, not to the transplant center. To my apartment, my mother brought lemon pound cake. My father wore a clean shirt and had the slightly diminished look of a man who has been sleeping poorly. We sat at my kitchen table and talked for 4 hours without managing a single thing except the truth. My father cried once. It was brief, and he turned his face slightly, the way men of his generation turn their face, and then he turned back and said, "I should have driven up myself. The night of the surgery. I should have gotten in the car." He said it knowing it was too late to be useful, which is the specific quality that makes a true accounting different from an excuse. I told him I believed he meant it. I did. My mother asked, toward the end of the afternoon, if she could see the apartment. I showed her the desk where I run the practice, the shelves of client files in their color-coded folders, and the certificate on the wall from the Ohio Society of CPAs that had been hanging there for 2 years without a single member of my family ever seeing it. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "You built all of this." I said I did. She looked at it for another moment. Then she turned to me and said, "Tell me about it." And I did. The surgery was scheduled for the second Thursday of March. The night before, in my room at the Cleveland Clinic, my mother sat in the visitor's chair with her coat and her scarf and a thermos of tea she had brought from home. The chair was full. I noticed that first. The visitor's chair was full this time. She stayed until 10 o'clock. When she stood to leave, she held my hand and said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About invisible. I think I confused capable with not needing. I told myself you were fine because looking closer would have required me to see something I wasn't ready to see." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't want to do that anymore." I said, "Then don't." My father came in just before the ward quieted for the night. He sat at the edge of the bed and held my hand in both of his and said, "You didn't have to do this." I said, "I know that." He said, "I am proud of you. I have been proud of you for a very long time, and I have been shamefully poor at saying so." I looked at him. I held his gaze. Then I said, "Tell me again when I'm awake afterward." He laughed, very softly. It sounded like him. The surgery went well. My father's body received the kidney, and the early response was, in the transplant team's language, excellent. My recovery took 6 weeks and was nothing like the last time. Ruth stayed the first 3 nights and brought enough food to last through the first 2 weeks. Eleanor called every few days. Denise, the ER nurse from Mercy General, had found my email through a colleague and sent a message. "Heard through the grapevine what you did. You were a brave patient, and you are clearly a brave person. Take care of yourself." I printed it and put it on the shelf next to the CPA certificate. My parents visited twice during my recovery. My father called every 3 days. He was learning, I think, that calling is not a thing you do when you have a reason. It is a thing you do because the person exists, and their existence is the reason. He did not always have much to say. Sometimes the call was 4 minutes about the weather and how dialysis was going, and whether the new doctor had adjusted the medication. I took those calls the same way I took the longer ones. They were real. They counted. My mother began sending packages, compression socks, herbal teas, a novel she had read, and underlined passages in, which is the most intimate thing she has ever done for me, and which I have not entirely figured out how to receive yet, except to receive it as real. Stephanie came once, in the second week. She stood in my hallway with flowers from a shop that was not the closest one to my building, which meant she had made some effort, and she had an expression on her face I had not seen from her before, a genuine discomfort, the kind that comes when the ordinary order of things has shifted, and you are not sure anymore where you fit in the new arrangement. She said, I should have been there, in the emergency room, 5 years ago. I should have come. I said yes. She said, I'm sorry. I said, okay. We sat together for 45 minutes, and she talked about the things she usually talks about, and I listened the way I have always listened, and when she left I sat with what I felt and found it was not the old ache of invisibility, but something much quieter, a kind of neutral recognition. Stephanie is the person she has always been. The difference now is that I have stopped needing her to be anyone else, which is the specific freedom that comes not from the other person changing, but from you finally setting down the weight of expecting them to. This is not a story about a kidney. I want to be clear about that, because I think it is easy to hear it that way. As a story about sacrifice rewarded, about a person who did something extraordinary for the family that had done too little for her and who was finally given what she deserved. That is not quite right. The donation was not a transaction. It was not a bargaining chip. It was not something I withheld until the conditions were met and then extended as a demonstration of my moral superiority. I donated because I am a match, and because when I walked far enough along that lake to find the actual question underneath everything else, the version of myself I wanted to be was the version that chose generously, not because it was owed, and not to be witnessed doing it, but because generosity, freely chosen from a position of clarity rather than fear or obligation, is one of the few things you can do that belongs entirely to you. What I required was honesty, the truth on the table before anything else could happen. That was the one non-negotiable. Not because I needed to punish them, but because I had been living for 34 years in a family where the comfortable version of events had been consistently preferred over the accurate one, and I was done with that. You cannot build something real on a foundation of things everyone has agreed not to say. I am 34 years old and I have 1 kidney. I have a business I built in 4 years of weekends and Tuesday evenings in the margins of a career my family called an office job. I have a friend who has a spare key to my apartment and standing instructions about my medical preferences. I have a nurse who remembered me. I have a shelf with a certificate and an email on it. I have a father who calls every 3 days now and says, sometimes at the end with the specific hesitance of a man learning a language he should have always known, I love you, kid. I have a mother who sends packages and who sat at my kitchen table with her coffee going cold and listened to me describe the business for an hour. I have, for the first time in my adult life, a family that is smaller than it once appeared and more honest than it has ever been. My grandmother used to say that the quiet ones are not quiet because they have nothing to say. They are quiet because they are deciding when it is worth the breath. I spent a long time deciding. I think she would understand where I finally landed. If someone in your life has treated your steadiness as permission to look away, here is what I want you to hear. You are not furniture. You are not a load-bearing wall. You are a person with a complete interior life that deserves to be met. And you do not have to perform a breakdown or stage a confrontation or wait until someone decides you have been patient long enough. You can simply begin, very quietly, to build the life that reflects who you actually are, not the life that centers other people's comfort, not the life that keeps the peace at the cost of your peace, your own life, built in the spaces where no one is watching, The rest, in my experience, tends to follow. What would you have done? If you were the match, if the family that left you in the emergency room came back 5 years later needing something that only you could provide, what would your answer have been? I am genuinely asking. Drop it in the comments below. I read them. I think about them. And if this story sat with you in a way you recognize, subscribe. There is a new story here every single day, and every one of them is for the person who has been waiting for someone to say, I see you, I believe you, your story is worth telling. I will see you in the next one. I want to close today by speaking to every single person who watched this all the way to this moment. You stayed. You gave the story your time, which is the most finite resource any of us has, and I am grateful for it in a way that is not performative. This channel exists because of what you do when you click and comment and share and come back the following day. You are the reason these stories get told out loud instead of sitting in the dark, where they have been sitting for years. I hope something in what you heard today is useful to you. I hope it reminds you that the things you carry without complaint are still real, that the life you build without an audience is still worth building, and that being seen is not something you have to earn by suffering loud enough. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Follow along and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next, because every story we tell here is someone's truth, and tomorrow's is no exception. I will see you then.